It's a real honor for me to be asked to give these closing thoughts. It's probably also one of the toughest assignments I've ever been given. But by my count, I think AfrEA had, 400 abstracts. There were probably almost 60 workshops. We must have at least 5 or 6 presentations in each. Then we just had about 20 of you speak. I think this will be the 700th presentation that will be presented to you. Probably thinking, what more can this guy possibly add? And so I'll try to keep it mercifully short. It's a great honor to be here. And as many of you know, AfrEA, the International Mission for Impact Evaluation, is an international nonprofit organization with a mission to advocate for and support the generation and use of evidence in low-middle-income countries that affect the lives of poor people. And that's a mission that we share with all of you in this room. Now, our niche in that mission is that we focus on evidence that comes from research where there is attribution. I think that regardless of where we come from, we all share the same vision for what evaluation should be doing. So that I think that we're just part of the broader evaluation community from that point of view. It'd be senseless for me to try and summarize the 20 strands and how many workshops that you've had. So I had to throw away my 50 PowerPoint presentations that I was going to inflict on you this afternoon. So what I'd like to reflect on is just basically on 3 questions, which I think cut across all of the, from my point of view, all of the sessions and the workshops. The 3 questions in my mind are that cut across these strands in the workshops were: 1, the question about, are we evaluating the right thing? Are we doing the right thing? The second is, are we making sure that we're doing this in the best way possible? Are we doing things right? And the third is, are we making sure that having done the right thing and doing it right, that they're being used for actual decisions? So let me just make 3 reflections based on my reading of the conference. The first on, are we evaluating the right thing? I think that the organizing committee of this conference was brilliant in choosing the SDGs as the framework, because that really made clear that African evaluation is going to be relevant to the internationally accepted goals of this world. And when I looked around at the program, as well as when I went to the workshops that I did, I was very impressed that you covered quite a bit of what was in the SDGs. Of course, I expected a lot of sessions on education, health, water, poverty, and I wasn't disappointed in that. But I was also impressed that you were tackling topics that we inherently as evaluators find really hard. There were sessions on climate change, on sustainable cities, humanitarian, and I must really congratulate you for that. And then there was a great emphasis to make sure that there's no one left behind, regardless of whether it's on income or ethnicity or gender. That permeated, I think, throughout all of the workshops. And I think even more impressively for those of us who are methodology nerds, you tackled the complexity of some of the interventions that the SDGs and their interactions imply. Where would I have thought I think might be a challenge for the future? I think there were still a couple of areas which might be for the next conference important topics, because there are a huge amount of resources going into these areas with very little evaluation. I'm talking about industry and infrastructure, global partnerships, and institution building. These are really inherently difficult topics for a number of reasons. They often tend to be implemented across the board in nations, so it's very hard to find comparators, at least from our methodology. And the political economy is tough. So much money is being spent on these sectors that it's not clear that those who control them really want them evaluated, and yet it's got to be done in the future. What we're doing at AfrEA in this is we've moved away from open windows, which are on any topic, and trying to prioritize and get support for what we call development priorities windows, which really focus on these themes that may be understudied relative to others, just to make sure that we don't congregate in those areas where it's easier to evaluate, rather than those where it's really important. The second observation is, are we making sure that we're doing evaluations as well as possible, really again permeated, to my mind, the whole conference. There was a lot of capacity building being done, and I saw this whole event as a construction site. I could really hear capacity being built as I walked the hallways, going to my sessions, and more importantly, perhaps outside the sessions, in the hallways and in the bars and wherever else that people were congregating. And that interaction was really palpable. But I also saw that you made a great effort to try to institutionalize this in a very impressive way, but making sure the right people were in the room. The policymakers, I'm very pleased that OPM was, for example, in Uganda, was a very important partner here. The parliamentarians who came were all interacting with the evaluators and researchers in a way that's rarely seen elsewhere. And then yesterday I went to a terrific session in South-South Learning, in which all of the evaluation societies were getting together and making sure there's a network that cuts across all of the regions in the world to make sure that you're learning from each other. Very impressive. The other thing, in terms of making sure that we get things right, is how to build research transparency. It's of course, the journal is great. I think that's going to raise quality. But it's another way to ensure that quality of evaluations is being done well, is to make sure that all of the information, not just the studies, but the data that we have, are available to everyone so that they can check it out. And that, I think, will provide a great incentive for all of us to up our game, because we're going to be checked. And from this point of view, for example, AfrEA is supporting a replication program, which in fact invites people to see if some of the most important and influential studies can be replicated, just to make sure that the results are robust. But the second thing that I'm really impressed about is on the quality of ensure the quality of all what we're doing. And I just wanted to emphasize those two issues of research transparency and country-led evaluations. The third and last thing is, how do we make sure that whatever we produce is actually being used in the decisions? And that's a tough one. Ironically, as someone mentioned, as evaluators, we can't really hold ourselves to account of what would have happened without our evaluation. It's really tough to do that. And the challenges aren't just with countries. Before I joined AfrEA, I was at the World Bank. I was, my last couple of years, Director of Public Sector Evaluations in the Independent Evaluation Group. And we, in fact, did an evaluation of all the impact evaluations that the World Bank had done over the past 15 years. This is the ultimate evaluation in nerviness, the evaluation of evaluations. And what we found was that only half of all the impact evaluations that have been done in the bank were being mentioned in the project completion report, which were supposed to report on the effectiveness of those projects. They didn't even know that these things were being done. So it's a challenge for everyone, how to make sure that these great academic studies don't just gather dust. And I think that here I also saw great things that were happening here in AfrEA. As I said, you've got the decision makers in the room, and one of the lessons that we've got at AfrEA certainly is that you don't just disseminate evaluation, you've got to engage them in a conversation throughout the whole process of where it's being conducted. There was also talk about how to make sure that when we do communicate, we do so in a professional way. I've been managing researchers for a lot of my career, and I must admit we are not the best communicators by temperament or by profession. But it's very easy actually to partner with professional communicators at a very early stage to make sure that we reach out to them. So those two things that I saw here in terms of bringing both communicators and the right decision makers in the room was really terrific. The one challenge I think for all of us in the future is incentives. That in the end, the evaluations will be used if the users have the incentive to do so, and that's not always the case. Again, let me hark back to my World Bank experience. One of the last evaluations that I launched before leaving IEG was an evaluation of how the World Bank is learning as an institution. And that was very interesting. And what we found, for example, is that the World Bank, as you know, is one of the world's greatest producers of development analysis. Reams of paper and hundreds of beautiful reports. And it turns out World Bank staff don't learn by reading those reports. They learn a lot. Okay? They learn a lot by talking to each other, by networking. And so it's very important then to think of what is your theory of change if you want to influence what they're doing. Right? You have to understand how they operate. So that's very important. The other thing that was important was that leadership really matters. A voice from the top that says that evidence matters is really important. One of the other country policy, even though we work on, is in the Philippines, where similarly our focal partner is not of the Prime Minister there, but the Ministry of Planning. And I asked, why is it that there's so much interest in evaluation here? And he said, well, with the ministers, this is in the previous administration, not in the present one, happily. Previous administration, when the cabinet ministers walked into the room, the secretaries, the president used to come around, would actually ask each of them when they proposed a new project, what did you learn in the last one? And what do you expect to learn in this one? And from that point, and that's why they were very, very interested in ensuring that their system had a value. So incentives matter. So I just leave those three lessons with you that I think that I really want to congratulate AfrEA 3IE because I really think you nailed those questions of what do we evaluate, how do we do it, and how do we make sure they're used. I do think there are future challenges, which I suppose will be discussed in Côte d'Ivoire and in other places. Let me just end with a story of where this can go. I heard yesterday about whether or not there's not just South-South learning and whether it's possible to have South-North learning. I remember I'm dating myself, in the mid-1990s, some Mexicans came to Washington, to the World Bank, and they called together a group of researchers to to brainstorm about this wonderful new but untried program they were trying out in Mexico. It's called the Conditional Cash Transfer Program, then Progressive. But it was really the Mexicans who led and got people together, and over a long period of time, made sure that Mexican researchers partnered with northern ones. And now that program, of course, is legendary, and Mexicans themselves are at the forefront of doing many of these evaluations. I do think that what I've seen here in AfrEA bodes well for the future, and I want to wish you all the best in that endeavor. Thank you again, it's been a pleasure.